In 1945, Britain controlled 1/4 of the Earth's land surface, the largest empire in human history. 7 years later, it was functionally bankrupt, forced to ration food worse than during the war, and begging America for loans just to survive. It wasn't the Nazis that destroyed the British Empire. It wasn't Churchill's mistakes or military defeats that brought it to its knees. It was a financial trap so subtle that even the world's most sophisticated treasury missed it until collapse was inevitable. The trap had a name. Economists call it the reserve currency death spiral. And once it triggers, history shows there's no way out. The pattern is mathematical. The timeline is predictable. The outcome is certain. Britain's mistake killed the world's dominant. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a coincidence. In 1959, economist Robert Triffin identified a mathematical paradox that appears before every reserve currency collapse, a pattern so precise that it predicted Britain's fall, warned of America's vulnerability, and has played out exactly as he described for over 60 years. The Triffin Dilemma. 5 stages. Irreversible once complete. Let me show you how it works. When a country issues the world's reserve currency, the money everyone else needs to conduct international trade, it faces an impossible contradiction. The world needs your currency to function. To supply that demand, you must run massive trade deficits, sending your currency overseas. But the more currency you export, the more debt you accumulate. Eventually, your liabilities exceed your ability to honor them. Confidence cracks, the currency collapses, and the empire falls. The pattern is mathematical, which makes it predictable. Stage 1, global adoption. The world begins using your currency for international trade, creating insatiable demand. Your currency becomes the foundation of global commerce. Everyone needs it. Everyone wants it. This feels like pure power. Stage 2, structural deficits. To supply global currency demand, you must run permanent trade deficits. You consume more than you produce. You import more than you export. Foreign holders accumulate massive claims against your economy. This feels manageable because your currency is trusted. Stage 3, debt accumulation. Those trade deficits transform into sovereign debt. Your liabilities grow exponentially while your productive capacity stagnates. The debt to GDP ratio climbs past sustainable levels. Economists warn about it. Politicians ignore it. This feels temporary because growth masks the danger. Stage 4, confidence crisis. Foreign holders begin questioning whether you can honor your obligations. They diversify away from your currency. They demand higher yields. They reduce exposure. The exodus starts slowly, then accelerates. This feels like betrayal, but it's mathematics. Stage 5, terminal collapse. The currency loses reserve status. Hyperinflation or severe depression follows. The empire's ability to project power evaporates. What took generations to build disappears in years. This feels sudden, but every stage was visible in advance. Britain completed all 5 stages between 1945 and 1952. The pattern appeared again with other reserve currencies throughout history, and right now, America is deep into stage 4. But there's one element that's even more dangerous. We'll get to that. Let's examine exactly how this pattern has destroyed reserve currencies throughout modern history. The evidence isn't theoretical. It's documented, measured, and precise. 1914 to 1925, Britain's first warning. Britain entered World War I as the undisputed financial superpower. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency, backing roughly 60% of global trade. British banks financed international commerce from Shanghai to São Paulo. Stage 1 was complete. Global adoption was total. Stage 2 emerged during the war. Britain ran massive deficits financing the conflict, borrowing heavily from America. By 1918, Britain owed the United States $4.7 billion, equivalent to roughly $900 billion today. Stage 3 accelerated through the 1920s. Britain's war debts kept growing while its industrial base stagnated. By 1925, total government debt reached 180% of GDP. The Treasury was spending more on debt service than on defense. Stage 4 appeared in 1931. Foreign holders began demanding gold for their pounds. The run on sterling forced Britain off the gold standard in September 1931. In just 48 hours, the pound lost 25% of its value against gold. But it didn't stop there. Britain would get one more chance before the final collapse. 1945 to 1952, the terminal phase. Britain emerged from World War II victorious, but financially destroyed. This time, the pattern was completed fully. Stage 1 was deteriorating. The pound was still a reserve currency, but America's dollar was rising fast. Britain controlled the sterling area, countries that pegged their currencies to the pound, but confidence was fragile. Stage 2 was critical. To maintain reserve currency status, Britain had to supply pounds globally while rebuilding a shattered economy. The country ran permanent trade deficits. In 1947 alone, Britain imported goods worth $4.1 billion while exporting only $1.9 billion. The deficit was hemorrhaging gold reserves. Stage 3 became catastrophic. Britain's external debt reached $13.5 billion by 1945, roughly $220 billion in today's terms. The country was borrowing just to service existing debt. In 1946, Britain negotiated a humiliating loan from America worth $3.75 billion at 2% interest. The Treasury was insolvent in all but name. Stage 4 triggered in 1947. Foreign holders began dumping pounds for dollars and gold. The sterling crisis of 1947 saw Britain lose 25% of its gold reserves in just 6 weeks. Chancellor Hugh Dalton wrote in his diary, "We are facing economic Dunkirk. Currency controls were imposed, imports were restricted. Food rationing, which had eased after the war, was reinstated and made worse than during the conflict." Stage 5 completed by 1952. The pound was devalued from 4.03 to 2.80 in 1949, a 30% collapse. By 1952, Britain was forced to accept that sterling would never return as the primary reserve currency. The empire began its rapid dissolution. India, Pakistan, Burma, Ceylon, gone. African colonies, gone. The empire that controlled 1/4 of the earth became a middle-tier power in less than a decade. The people who managed Britain's treasury weren't stupid. They were among the most sophisticated financial minds in the world, but they were trapped by the mathematics of the reserve currency paradox. History repeated the pattern with other currencies, but let me show you the most important example. In 1960 to 1971, America's first crisis. By 1960, the dollar had fully replaced sterling as the world's reserve currency, and immediately the Triffin Dilemma appeared. Robert Triffin himself testified before Congress in 1960, warning that America faced the same trap that destroyed Britain. His testimony was mathematical. The continuous increase in dollar liabilities abroad is clearly not sustainable indefinitely. Sooner or later, confidence will be shaken. Stage 1, complete. The dollar backed 80% of global trade by 1960. Stage 2, accelerating. America ran its first peacetime trade deficit in 1971. To supply global dollar demand, the U.S. was exporting currency faster than it produced goods. Stage 3, growing. U.S. gold reserves fell from 20,000 tons in 1950 to 8,100 tons by 1971, as foreign governments exchanged dollars for gold under Bretton Woods rules. Stage 4, critical. In 1971, France sent a battleship to New York Harbor to collect gold for its dollars, a direct challenge to American solvency. Other countries followed. The run on Fort Knox began. Stage 5 was prevented. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window, severing the dollar's link to gold. This was a controlled collapse, a partial default that prevented full terminal crisis. But here's what nobody understood at the time. Nixon's action didn't solve the Triffin Dilemma. It delayed it. The same mathematical forces continued building, and now they're reaching their conclusion. 2008 to 2024, the current cycle. The pattern appeared again in 2008 and has been building toward completion ever since. Stage 1, still dominant but weakening. The dollar backs roughly 59% of global reserves as of 2024, down from 72% in 2001. Stage 2, permanent. America has run trade deficits every single year since 1975. The 2023 trade deficit reached $773 billion. To maintain reserve currency status, this must continue. Stage 3, exponential. U.S. national debt reached $35.9 trillion in November 2024. That's 123% of GDP, higher than any point except the immediate aftermath of World War II. Interest payments on that debt exceeded $1 trillion annually for the first time in history. That's more than defense spending. Stage 4, accelerating now. Foreign holders are reducing dollar exposure at the fastest rate in decades. Remember this number, $35.9 trillion. Or we'll come back to it. The trigger event in 1931 was France's demand for gold. The trigger in 1971 was France demanding gold. Today's trigger is already loading. The diversification away from treasuries by foreign central banks. Once it accelerates past a critical threshold, confidence cracks completely, and stage 5 waits. Now, here's where it gets disturbing. Every single stage of this pattern is present today, and the parallels to Britain's 1945-1952 collapse are mathematical. Britain in 1945, $13.5 billion in external debt, 180% debt to GDP ratio, forced to borrow to service existing debt. America in 2024, $35.9 trillion in total debt, 123% debt to GDP ratio, borrowing $2 trillion annually just to cover budget deficits and interest payments. Britain in 1947 lost 25% of gold reserves in 6 weeks as foreign holders dumped sterling. America in 2024, Foreign central banks reduced Treasury holdings by $314 billion in 2023 alone, the largest single-year reduction on record, according to Treasury Department data. Britain, in 1949, currency devalued 30% as confidence collapsed. America's dollar index has declined 8% since 2024's peak, and volatility indicators show mounting pressure. The same signals that preceded Britain's collapse are flashing red across American financial markets right now. The Congressional Budget Office projects that under current policies, U.S. debt will reach 166% of GDP by 2034. That's beyond Britain's 1945 level, the point where collapse became inevitable. The Federal Reserve's own data shows foreign holdings of dollar-denominated assets as a percentage of global reserves declining every year since 2014. This is stage 4 in motion. But there's one element that makes America a situation even more dangerous than Britain's. Britain had a powerful ally to bail it out. America has no one. When Britain collapsed, the United States provided emergency loans and assumed global leadership. When America's reserve currency status fails, there's no larger economy to absorb the shock. China's economy is still smaller. The European Union is fragmented. The International Monetary Fund doesn't have the resources. The parallels are mathematical. Point for point, stage for stage, the same pattern that destroyed the British Empire is being completed in America. Right now, as I'm recording this in late 2024, we're deep into stage 4. Foreign diversification is accelerating. Confidence is cracking. Debt service costs are exploding. The Congressional Budget Office, the Federal Reserve, and the Treasury Department have all published warnings about unsustainable fiscal trajectories. And history shows what happens next. Based on the historical pattern, here's what happens next. Between 2025 and 2027, America will face a terminal confidence crisis in treasury markets. Foreign central banks will accelerate their diversification away from dollars. Yields on U.S. government bonds will spike as demand collapses. The Federal Reserve will face an impossible choice: allow interest rates to soar and crash the economy, or print money to buy bonds and trigger currency collapse. Britain's collapse took 7 years from 1945 to 1952. The pattern moves faster now because global capital moves at digital speed. The consequences will be concrete. Your savings in dollar-denominated assets will lose purchasing power. Your retirement accounts holding treasury bonds will crater. Government services will be cut as interest payments consume the entire federal budget. America's ability to project military power will decline as deficit financing becomes impossible. This isn't sensationalism. This is the documented pattern of reserve currency collapse, supported by Congressional Budget Office projections, Federal Reserve data, and historical precedent. The people who got destroyed in 1931 weren't stupid. They were unprepared. The British Treasury officials who watched their empire crumble in 1952 were not incompetent. They were trapped by mathematics they couldn't escape. The investors who lost everything when sterling collapsed were not reckless. They simply didn't understand the pattern until it was too late. Nobody warned them clearly enough. Nobody will warn you either. The financial media won't connect these dots because the implications are too severe. Politicians won't acknowledge it because there's no solution that doesn't involve painful choices. And by the time the crisis is obvious to everyone, the opportunity to prepare will have passed. History never asks permission. It just repeats. 5 stages before collapse. 4 are complete. Only 1 remains. This video is for educational and historical purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. All data cited is from public sources, including the Congressional Budget Office, Federal Reserve, U.S. Treasury Department, and historical economic records. Viewers should conduct their own research and consult qualified financial professionals before making any investment decisions.